Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about William Shakespeare's The Merry Wives of Windsor.
What? Is this just names and plays? The Merry Wives of Windsor.
This is a play. The famous story about it is that Queen Elizabeth I so loved the character of Falstaff from Shakespeare's Henry IV plays that she demanded Shakespeare write a play about Falstaff in love. It's a great story. The problem is there's no actual evidence for this. There's no reason to think that it ever actually occurred. It is quite likely that Falstaff was an incredibly popular character. And so that is probably a big motivating factor for why Shakespeare brings him back in Merry Wives. For those of you who don't know the character of Falstaff, he is a knight. He is a very large fellow. He's gluttonous. He's a drunkard. He drinks prodigious amounts of sack, which was a fortified wine. He eats prodigious amounts of food. He is a carnivalesque figure, right? He is a figure of wine, women, and song. And in the Henry IV plays, he is the companion of Prince Hal when Prince Hal is pretending to be a sort of dissolute wastrel, etc., etc. In Merry Wives, they have gone their separate ways, which we see in the Henry IV plays. Hal, as he transitions to becoming Henry V, the good king of Shakespeare's plays, Hal rejects Falstaff. And so Falstaff, along with his followers, Bardolph, Pistol, Nym, etc., they apparently make their way to Windsor, which is a town outside London, not in London itself. It's a different place. In case that wasn't clear. There, Falstaff sets his eye on two women of the town, Mistress Page and Mistress Ford, married appropriately enough to Ford and Page, respectively. Part of the reason that he sets his eye on them is because both Ford and Page are wealthy men, and their wives have control of their money. So Falstaff's aim is to seduce these two women, and then through that to get access to their money. This sounds like the setup for a comedy, and indeed it is. But interestingly enough, this is also a revenge play. And the reason that I say that that's interesting is because many early modern tragedies are revenge plays, right? Hamlet is maybe the great example of this, because Claudius has killed old Hamlet. Young Hamlet spends the entire play basically thinking about whether/how to take revenge for his father. This is typically a tragic setup, but here it's a comic setup. So Falstaff tries to woo these two married women. He tries to woo them with the exact same letter. He sends them each a copy of it, but it is worded exactly the same. The only thing that's different is one says Mistress Page, one says Mistress Ford. So they get together, they exchange these letters, and they decide that they are going to take revenge on Falstaff for his lechery and greed, essentially. At the same time, Ford is a very jealous guy. And Mistress Ford is not that keen on his jealousy because she has actually not done anything to justify him being jealous. So she decides she's also going to take revenge on him. alongside this, you've got a subplot that seems not necessarily that important, where Sir Hugh, who's a Welsh parson, and Dr. Caius, who's a French doctor, they are going to have a duel. And the larger storyline there is that you've got 3 or 4 different people pursuing the hand of Anne Page, who's Page and Mistress Page's daughter. And she's the sort of ingenue of the play, the sort of young, lovely object of affection. And you've got a bunch of people sort of scheming to marry her. But Hugh and Caius, basically Caius decides he's going to take revenge on Hugh because Hugh is trying to fix someone else up with Anne Page. And so Caius challenges Hugh to a duel. The host of the Garter, who's the sort of innkeeper where Falstaff is staying, sends them to different places so they don't actually get to duel. Then he brings them together and is like, shut up, you're not having a duel, let's go get drunk at my inn where you can pay me for alcohol. And Caius and Sir Hugh decide they're going to take revenge on him. So you've got a bunch of different revenge plots going. Now, the thing that makes this comedy rather than tragedy, one is that no one dies. 2 is that everything unfolds in this kind of slapstick humor, right? So, if we follow the main storyline of Falstaff pursuing Mistress Page and Mistress Ford, basically, Mistress Ford sends him a message by Mistress Quickly, who's just sort of fucking up in everybody's business. So she sends him a message basically being like, hey, at this time my husband's not going to be around, so why don't you come by and we'll see how things go. The plan is that when Falstaff shows up, she's going to be like, oh, Falstaff, you're so dreamy. And then Mistress Page is going to come in and be like, your husband's coming. Hopefully Falstaff's not here, because that would go bad. And then they're going to get Falstaff to hide in this basket of dirty laundry and have 2 serving men take him down to the river in that basket and dump him in the Thames. Plan works like a charm. The only slight hitch to the plan is that Ford actually does show up because he's gone undercover dressed as a guy named Brooke, and he's gone to Falstaff and basically been like, hey, my name is Brooke, and I really want to have sex with Mistress Ford, but she's so chaste, she won't have sex with me. But if you get her to have sex with you, then I can basically blackmail her into having sex with me. And I'll give you a bunch of money to do this. So Ford hires Falstaff to seduce Ford's wife, basically in the intention of testing her fidelity. So there's that going on. But because Ford is masquerading as Brooke, he knows Falstaff's plans, because Falstaff's like, yeah, she sent me a message to come to her house between 10 and 11 when her husband's not going to be there. So I'll be doing that, and I'll be having sex with her. Then you get to have sex with her. So because Ford now knows when Falstaff is supposed to go there, he actually does go, which doesn't seem to have been part of Mistress Ford and Mistress Page's plans, but it doesn't really make any difference, because again, Mistress Ford wants to take revenge on her husband, so she's actually fine with him showing up with a bunch of the other people from the town, and him going through the house and looking like a fool, because they can't find Falstaff, who's been taken out of the house in this dirty laundry basket and dumped in the river. Part 2 of the revenge, Mistress Ford sends Falstaff another message and is like, oh, that was real unfortunate. I totes didn't mean for that to happen. Why don't you come back to my house at this particular time? And the idea is that this time, Mistress Ford and Mistress Page will basically play the same gag, except rather than putting Falstaff in the basket of dirty laundry, they're just going to send out a basket of dirty laundry so that Ford will think that he's in there, and he'll go through these dirty clothes and he'll look like a fool in front of his friends. But Falstaff, they still want more revenge on him. So they're going to disguise him as this old woman, this witch of Brentford, whom Ford absolutely hates. So they will disguise Falstaff as this woman, put him in a women's robe or whatever it is, and then Ford will beat him with a cudgel because he hates this woman so much. So that happens. Then they're basically like, okay, we're going to hit this guy one more time, Falstaff one more time, then we're sure he's learned his lesson. They send word to him that basically he can have sex with both of them if he shows up at this forest in the middle of the night, dressed as this mythical being. So Mistress Page explains, and by this point, Ford and all the rest are sort of in on this gag. This has become a communal thing, because basically Mistress Ford and Mistress Page have proved their fidelity to their husbands, although Page believed his wife was faithful anyway. So she says, there's an old tale that goes that Herne the Hunter, sometimes a keeper here in Windsor Forest, doth all in the winter time, at still midnight, walk round about an oak with great ragged horns, and there he blasts the tree, and takes the cattle, and makes milk kine yield blood, and shakes a chain in a most hideous and dreadful manner. You have heard of such a spirit, and well you know the superstitious idle-headed eld received and did deliver to our age this tale of Herne the Hunter for a truth. So basically there's this local legend that the ghost of this gamekeeper comes to this particular tree in the middle of the night, and he has horns, and he scrapes his horns against this tree, etc., etc., and he does all this mischief. And supposedly people believe it. So the plan is that they will lure Falstaff there, dressed as Herne the Hunter, and basically the message from Mistress Ford and Mistress Page is, you can have sex with both of us if you show up here dressed as Herne the Hunter. And then the plan becomes that they're going to recruit a bunch of children, led by Sir Hugh, and the other guys are kind of involved in it as well. And everybody is going to pretend to be fairies. And they're basically going to surround Falstaff and pinch him and burn him with candles, which sounds actually really quite violent and fairly brutal, but you got to kind of imagine this in a slapstick style. Like, if you think about this as like a Three Stooges or Looney Tunes type performance, you can see it as comedy rather than sort of fairly unpleasant torture of this guy. So that's the plan. They're basically going to pinch and poke at Falstaff with lit candles, and basically just shame him for his lechery and greed. While that is going on, a bunch of different people make plans to make off with Anne Page and marry her. Dr. Caius gets sort of lined up, taking instructions from Mistress Page, who wants him to marry her daughter, to steal Anne Page from this group of fairies. What's the guy's name? Slender. Sorry, there's Slender and Shallow, and they're uncle and nephew, and I slightly get them mixed up. So Slender is the choice of Page to marry his daughter, and so he makes similar arrangements. And then there's Fenton, who's this sort of young, handsome, slightly impoverished nobleman, but also the true love of Anne Page. So they make a plan to sneak off together and get married. So that's all going on. And basically everything just sort of goes to plan in terms of punishing Falstaff and Fenton marrying Anne Page. So basically, if there's a thesis to this play, I would say it comes in Act 4, Scene 2, line 105, which is that wives may be merry and yet honest too. This is essentially what the play is about, this idea that Falstaff sort of mistakes the jocularity of these wives, and it's not even clear that they are all that, like, it's not clear that they're, like, going out to nightclubs and dancing and drinking and flirting with men or whatever it is, but Falstaff perceives it that way. And so the idea is basically that women can be faithful to their husbands. I know, novel concept. But this is also actually a really challenging play to read, even by the standards of Shakespeare. And obviously, a lot of people who don't regularly read early modern English often struggle with Shakespeare. But even compared to most other Shakespeare plays, this is a fairly difficult one to read. One, because there's very little of it that's in verse, which seems counterintuitive, because verse is a less naturalistic style, but it actually does make it easier to read and understand Shakespearean language. Much of this because there's very few noble characters here. And typically the convention in Shakespearean drama, Elizabethan drama, Renaissance drama, early modern drama, is that nobles, aristocrats, the upper crust, they will speak in blank verse. Servants, working class characters, they will speak in prose. And the prose actually makes it a lot harder here, strangely enough. But the other thing is, and this is really the main contributing factor in what makes this challenging, you have a lot of characters who consistently and deliberately misspeak. They use the wrong word, or they make up words that sound similar to real words, but aren't actually real words. And so I'm going to give you one example of this, one bit from Slender, and then Sir Hugh's response to it. So this is Act 1, Scene 1. Slender's a weird cat in this play, because Shallow, his uncle, and Page both want him to marry Anne Page, and he's kind of like, I guess, whatever, I don't really care. I'm not that interested in marrying her. And she at one point even asks him, do you want to marry me? And he's like, meh, I will. I don't care that much one way or the other. So he's an interesting figure. But Slender says, this is Act 1, Scene 1, starting at line 240. I will marry her, sir, at your request. But if there be no great love in the beginning, yet heaven may decrease it upon better acquaintance. That should be increase it. So the fact that he says the opposite is striking and confusing if you don't sort of recognize that that's part of the comedy. When we are married and have more occasion to know one another, I hope upon familiarity will grow more content. But if you say, marry her, I will marry her, that I am freely dissolved and dissolutely. That should be resolved and resolutely. So again, these are words that have the opposite meaning, and they are switched out for comic effect. But if you're trying to understand what's actually happening here, especially if you're not used to reading early modern English, this makes it a lot harder. And this one, I like this example because Sir Hugh then says, It is a fairy discretion answer, and fairy, F-E-R-Y. Sir Hugh is Welsh, and I don't understand the accent that Shakespeare has tried to write here for this Welsh character. There are clearly elements that don't sound like proper English, but to me, I don't see a way of this sounding like a Welsh accent. But it is a fairy discretion answer, save the fall is in the ord, apostrophe O-R-D rather than the word, dissolutely. The ort is, according to our meaning, resolutely. His meaning is good. So Sir Hugh points out one of the three errors here, that it should be resolutely rather than dissolutely. He missed resolved rather than dissolved, and increase rather than decrease. But again, because the language here is awkward and counterintuitive, it can be very difficult to figure out exactly what's going on here and why.